Guys, I'm Steve Reichert. Welcome to the Living Vertical channel, and this is my Sunday night live stream. And the Living Vertical channel is all about encouraging you to tell your story with a camera. Now, if we haven't met before, I am an adventure and documentary photographer, which means that pretty much I just love being outside and I love telling stories with a camera. And working and playing outside with friends and family is really the stories that are closest to me. And so those are the stories that I tend to focus on and that I like to tell. And my hope is that through this channel, I can support you all in doing that too, because I honestly believe that the smaller stories, the ones that we are living and telling in our day to day life, are the ones that are really more important than ever nowadays when the world is looking for more inspiration and encouragement, and we have a lot of that to give. And so that's kind of the focus of what we're doing here on this channel. And every Sunday night, I like to chat with you all and take questions, give some comments and feedback, leave stuff open to my audience, let you guys kind of kick some topics around here with me. Anything from storytelling to outdoor stuff. Occasionally, we get a little bit of political rants and tirades, which are always interesting as well. And tonight, what I want to talk about a little bit, just to start off with, is the fix my lighting ish, or try to fix my lighting a little bit late perhaps, but tonight what I want to start off with is talking a little bit about photo critiques. So I've gotten some requests for photo critiques, and I generally have stayed away from them on this channel. And I'm curious to hear what you guys think about photo critiques, whether or not you think they are helpful. I kind of have a mixed opinion on them, because I think that from some standpoints, a photo critique can be really useful when it gives us an opportunity to explore pictures of our own, pictures of that other people take, really, because we get a chance to notice new things. And one of the things I think is the most important about having a camera on us at all times, and using our cameras and telling stories with intent, is that it gives us the opportunity and the compulsion to notice things. It really enhances our ability to see stories where before maybe we just saw just a random series of events happening. And when we have a camera, it forces us to see patterns and to kind of build these stories out of our daily life and our experiences. Um, Let me do that. Makes the light a little bit better. And so I guess to that extent, I can see the value and the benefit in working with photo critique. So I've had some requests to do some critiques, and I actually just recorded one, and I'm going to be publishing it this week. So that's a little bit about what I have coming up there with photo critiques. I've generally stayed away from photo critiques just because I feel like they tend to be a little bit on the they tend to feel a little bit self-important, I guess, in some cases, and so I've always been a little bit leery of getting too involved with them, because really what I want to be able to bring through this channel to you all is something that's a little bit more tangible and that's a little more practical, that really emphasizes the hands-on value of being out there with a camera and telling a story whenever we have the opportunity, rather than just analyzing and overanalyzing things to death and picking it apart, because that analysis paralysis can create really negative effects too if we overdo it. So not something I've done a whole lot of in the past, but I got some requests specifically to do one, and that kind of led me to think about it a little bit differently, change my mind. And I'm, like I said, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about this. And one of the things also that I'm hoping to do over the coming weeks on the channel here is to start reintroducing the Living Vertical photo challenges, where we explore a specific skill or technique, and we do that for a week or two, share images on social media using the hashtag, the LVPhotoChallenge hashtag, and then have a chance to contrast and compare and pick pick stuff apart a little bit. And really, when I say pick stuff apart, I mean just really notice things in our own imagery and how a little narrower focus can help us achieve more specific, more desired results, and also by looking at the images that each other or our partners might be taking, and that we're seeing from our friends and partners on social media, and kind of look at that with a similar outlook or intent. So my hope is that doing some more not article critiques, photo critiques, doing more photo critiques might help me get a better idea of things that people are struggling with, or things that kind of keep coming up in images that could make some useful sort of guidelines to frame out, a series of photo challenges that we could do to better inform that practice, so that it could be a little bit more useful in terms of serving the needs of this community. So that's pretty much what I have cooking, and kind of my thoughts and opinions on photo critiques. It's definitely challenging for me to kind of put my stuff out there in terms of what I think about another person's photos, just because the fact that I don't really look at my perspective or opinion as being valuable, since it's not my picture, and everybody takes pictures for different reasons, and they want to convey different things, and they have different things in their mind, and so that communication is always a very relative thing. And I want to be really careful not getting too carried away with that. But I think there's also, it's good to practice that communication at the same time, and to give each other feedback. Hey, Garth, good to see you on here. Greetings from South Africa. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're tuned in. Hope you're doing well over there, and that everything is reasonably safe and good under the conditions, such as they are. I've heard a little bit on the news about some of the difficulty that is happening over your part of the world there. So, my own opinion about photography shouldn't matter too much, and honestly, even the opinion of other people who I respect a lot as photographers, there's a certain extent to which I don't really care what they think about my photos. So I don't necessarily think I would reach out to too many other people and say, hey, I want to know what you think about my photo, because there's a certain extent to which there's a certain amount of solitude that happens in that creative process, but it's nice to also involve other people. So I mean, you can probably tell just from this little monologue here that I'm somewhat on the fence about what makes sense and what doesn't, kind of where I feel critiques fit in, and some of the pros and cons to that. So it's always an honor for me, though. It's always very flattering when people reach out and ask for my opinion, as though it matters. And hopefully, I think that by noticing and explaining some of the things that I react to when I see in photos, hopefully that gives a good starting point for others, and to chime in and kind of add a whole bunch of different perspectives, and we'll see where it goes. Good evening, King Yuzi. I see our international contingency is pretty strong tonight. That is good. 2/3 of the audience tonight is from overseas. So, good deal. Garth says, how do we get the photos to me? So, the photo critique that I just did was via Twitter, and I had a lady shoot me a message on Twitter, sent me some photos, said, hey, could you give me an honest opinion? And so I did my best to do that. You can do it Instagram, Twitter, email. My email is steve@livingvertical.org. And so pretty much any method of communication that you can find me on, I'm on most of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, although I hate Facebook, and honestly Twitter and Instagram aren't much better, but I'm willing to give up a little of my time for those mediums, and directly via email is cool too. And so I'm not necessarily looking to make photo critiques like a huge part of what I do here, but at the same time, for those who are genuinely interested in it, I'm curious to kind of dip my toe in the water, because especially as a part of my Thursday Thoughts segment. So every Thursday I do a kind of more of a technical discussion where I'm either discussing some creative principle, and I generally try to make these shorter videos on Thursdays, but honestly, that doesn't always work out like this. This photo critique, it was supposed to be like, a very rapid fire 4 minute video, 3 minute video, and it was, by the time everything's said and done, it's about 15 minutes long, which, hey, like I'm not gonna half-ass a discussion of something that, somebody sends me their pictures. I'm not gonna try to rush through it. I want to, actually say the things that are on my mind, and kind of go, do it justice. But yeah, that's what I'm doing on Thursdays, in addition to the more narrative contents that I'm trying, pieces of content, I should say, that I'm trying to do once a week. Usually I'm releasing those on Tuesday, so there's a little bit of, give and take between here's what I'm making versus here's some ideas that, from a technical standpoint, that help me make those stories and that content. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And then the Sunday night live stream is just an opportunity to kind of kick stuff around and have some general discussions. And I've shot a handful of videos that I think are going to be really good. And it's challenging making the narrative pieces because they tend to take a lot more time than the technical pieces. Like, I can sit down and bang out a discussion about composition or even a photo critique. I can do that in like 1 or 2 days. Whereas something that's a little bit more narrative, there's a little more of a story. Generally, there's a lot more footage to go through, and there's a lot more of a, you really have to kind of tease it out and kind of mix the ingredients in a bowl. That's kind of the metaphor that's really been on my mind with storytelling a lot lately, is that there's, especially this type of storytelling from a, I guess you'd call it a vlog or a YouTube setting, where it's something we're pursuing excellence in the craft of storytelling, and making a video here on YouTube, or even a set of still images for Instagram. We're pursuing excellence there, but at the same time, we're doing other things in our life, and it's not necessarily Hollywood style. So it's not like everything is fully scripted and we know what's going to happen. This is real life, on the fly, flying by the seat of your pants, however you want to interpret it. That type of storytelling, where the set points that for certain there are minimal, and so you have to kind of shoot a lot of stuff, because the story could turn in several different ways. And so at the end, you're still not 100% sure of like which one is going to be that final culmination of your story, what's going to make the most sense, until you go back and look at the footage. I mean, sometimes, and then that's really helpful. But in many cases, I find like there's so many different stories, because when you have interesting people, and interesting situations and interesting problems that you're trying to solve, then there's usually a few different ways you could go with the story. And maybe you're going to do separate videos or separate little explorations of each one of those components of the story, but you need to separate them out. You have to tease that stuff apart and organize it. And so that all takes a lot of time, trying to find that story when you're shooting kind of and casting a broad, wide net, and trying to then fish everything out and then make everything connect. And I don't really know that I have a very technical process for doing that, whether it's with still photography or with making YouTube videos. A lot of it really, for me, always comes down to just exploring things that I'm curious about and that I'm actually interested in. And then the other thing is just to say, well, what would happen if? And then generally, if I have that question in my mind, and I kind of follow that out until I have some ideas that kind of tie into that and go along with it. And then what I wind up with is, I wind up with this bowl of ingredients that, that I can kind of formulate into something that's a little bit more finite. So that's kind of some of my process. And I think that some of that process comes out in the photo critiques too, just in terms of sharing the way that I look at things, because it can be really easy after the fact to critique an image or even a video or something like that. And I may even start, if you guys are interested, I'd love to do video critiques and talk about, do some video challenges in addition to the photo challenges here on the LivingVertical channel, because I think that would be nice to kind of build things out a little bit and to expand the storytelling just from still photography into video. and kind of maybe create an opportunity for some of you guys who just shoot video, or I'm sorry, just shoot photography to get into video, and maybe kind of some crossover stuff there, because I feel like a lot of the folks that are in this community here do at least a little bit of both, a little bit of dabbling. I think more and more people that are in creative spaces now are doing a little bit of both. So Garth asks, what's the time on your side? Would you consider looking at a video I did using the XH1 sometime? I've been keen to make content about living sustainably in South Africa, but it's so hard to make content and do all the things that are required. Required building and living off the grid. That would be awesome, and I would love to participate. Excellent. Yes, Garth, I would absolutely. Sorry. First of all, the time over here right now is 7:15 p.m., so early evening. I would love, and this is when I typically do. You can enable notifications if you're subscribed, which if you're not already would be awesome. I'd be honored if you do that. And every Sunday, I try to do the live stream right around this time when I'm not super busy, because I can totally relate to what you're saying about the difficulty of filming and and living life. Right now, I have nursing school, and I actually have an exam tomorrow, kind of a midterm tomorrow that I have to cram for after I do this. So I'm always juggling a bunch of stuff too, and Sunday nights is when I do this. I would love to look at your video with the XH1, and maybe that would be a cool thing to do for maybe the following week. Throw that in there if you're cool with that. Shoot me an email, get a hold of me. And I'll leave all that stuff linked down below for those of you who are watching afterwards here too. Whatever way you want to reach out and connect with me, we can figure it out. So love to do that. In terms of the sustainable living, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because the shoot that I just did, good evening, Scott Paterson, I think. Good to see you here. The shoot that I just did last week, it was actually a professional shoot that I did. One of my friends owns a business, and he's also doing permaculture work on the side, but he is involved in a tool and heavy equipment rental business. And so he's been kind of doing some experimentation on his personal property, basically doing some work with permaculture stuff, and burying logs and improving the soil and bees and bats and all this stuff. And it really got me inspired. And so now I am looking at kind of doing that stuff too. Now, the video I'm going to put out on Tuesday, my first video, my narrative piece for this week, it's about fly tying with my daughter. Now, fishing and outdoor sports have been a huge part of my life, and with the climbing and hiking and backpacking and traveling, been something that really means a lot to me and has gotten me involved in storytelling. However, now that I'm going back to school for nursing, and a lot more of my life now relates to and is centered around my family, the stories that I'm seeing coming out of my life are more based around, well, my family. And I've kind of gotten to this point where the whole concept of the family video, it's something that we look down on like it's a dirty word, and it's just kind of like silly. But I think that there is a real opportunity for those of us who have creative passion to really involve our family in those things in a way that is tasteful, where it's not like, forced family vlogging and like kind of, putting kids on the spot and making them, perform for the camera, because I'm very aware of that, and I don't want to do that. But where I can chronicle the experiences that I'm having with my daughter, and I can preserve them for her and for me too, honestly. And I mean, she's about to turn 4 in May, and I can tell you, like, every day or two, my wife and we will send each other a message of like a video from, when she was 2 or when she was 1.5, and there was some funny little thing she did. And it's just like, at the moment it was kind of like, I don't think I'm ever going to need this video, but what the hell, I'll keep it. I can't delete it. It feels wrong to delete it. And then you come back to it X amount of years later, or months later even, and it's just like precious. It's like this treasure that you kind of stocked away for yourself to reclaim later. And it's the same thing with like the longer videos and stuff like that. So I've been getting very interested now in when my daughter was here with me this past week. I was on spring break, and we went to see the chicks at literal baby chickens, if you will, at Tractor Supply Company, and of course she wanted to pick them up, and because they're there for commercial sale and it's around Easter time, they don't want farm animals being handled by every kid that comes in coughing on them, wiping their nose on the chicken and putting the chicken back. And around Easter time, people will always come in. They want to buy one chick just for like a pet, and they give it to their kid or something, and then it's just like, oh, now what do we do with it? So they're very restrictive on who they let touch the chicks and stuff. And when I was growing up here on this property, which I'm actually back living with my dad while I'm going to nursing school. This desk behind me, somebody complimented me on this desk. This desk, my mom was actually refinishing this desk on the day that I was born. 35 and a half years ago. So there's a lot of personal history here, and so the family stuff really ties in. And I was thinking to myself, it would be awesome to have chickens here because we have a chicken coop and a lot of the stuff that the infrastructure, if you will, that I made use of and my family made use of when I was a little kid, when my dad was in good enough health to kind of keep the place up, it was it wasn't a full-on farm, but it was kind of like a hobby farm where we had chickens and we had, did a little bit of hunting and fishing and minimal amount of butchering, but had our own eggs and a couple of gardens and flower beds. And that was always like a big part of my life. And so now I'm kind of going in that direction again. And so all that to say, sorry, Garth, I kind of went off on a little tangent there because I'm kind of excited about that exact same thing, and I think that's going to be part of my storytelling that's going to happen this coming year. It's going to be hopefully educational. I hope it will be educational on some level, and I think that if anything, maybe it's more just to kind of get people interested, because I don't know that at this point, the problem with doing educational content is that educational content really requires a very strict focus. And I'd love to do some educational videos as I get questions, but I'm learning so much right now that my thought process is more on the why of doing this. And for me, the why all comes down to like family and adventure. Like, these are adventures, like having chickens and going fishing and putting in a garden and building stuff and digging in the dirt, and those are things that adventures that most people can have on some level. Maybe not having chickens, but doing something of that nature and really focusing on the why. Because for me, that's what inspiration really is. It's exploring the reasons why you do something and why you do hard work. Inspiration can't be separated from hard work. And so I think that there's an extent to which there really isn't any way around the, as you say, just really hard work of trying to do stuff that's hard to survive, but then also creating something out of it that's both inspirational and educational, or at least inspirational or educational, right? Where you can go either way. I haven't watched Cody's Lab. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't really watch very much content on YouTube. I don't even get to listen to podcasts very much. I mean, honestly, my day consists of trying to get out one Instagram post per day, which doesn't always happen. I also pretty much one post on Instagram a day, and I try to respond to anybody who contacts me on Twitter, respond to comments on my YouTube videos, shoot, edit for my 2 weekly videos, and do writing and planning for the next week's videos, try to shoot stuff ahead, and then also kind of work on stuff for my Patreon folks that are there, because I have a side project that I'm concluding right now that's specifically tailored to my Patreon audience, and then of course family time, and then school, and then I'm teaching as well as taking classes. So it's like the only time I have to do and consume content is really podcasts, because when I'm in the car driving back and forth to and from school, that's the time that I have to consume content. Other than that, I pretty much don't have much time, and in a way that's kind of good because it eliminates some distractions. I mean, I know that there's just a world of really amazing content, and every now and then I'll kind of poke my head out from over the rim of the crater and say, oh, what's going on out there? But for the most part, I'm just like head down, focused on my stuff and my audience as much as I possibly can, because otherwise it's just like I have such a tenuous balance right now with time management that if I go too far off in any one direction, then everything falls apart. And if everything falls apart, I have to ultimately, of course, prioritize, my education, because going into nursing, that's kind of what I'm doing professionally. That's my next step professionally, more so than YouTube, which that would be great if YouTube becomes somewhat of a professional venture for me. But I don't at this point. I don't know that that's not where things are at right now. But yeah, I appreciate that recommendation, Yusuf. I would love to check that out. And I get a lot of good recommendations here, and sometimes it takes me a while to follow up on them. And like with Sean Tucker, I watched some of his stuff, and it took me a little while to follow up. But that's where I did that. I did some of that stuff. But for my part, and I think the interesting thing too is when we go into any type of content on YouTube, there's always a variety of different perspectives. And so the perspective that I'm going to be bringing is not necessarily that of an expert. And I think to do educational stuff, Garth, sounds like you have more expertise on this, where you could possibly lend, the actual instructional value, whereas for me, I don't really know enough to be reliable. I mean, I could pretend, I could use big words, and like if you like, I'm kind of kidding, but kind of not. Like if you know how to speak, you can make yourself sound like an authority on just about anything by using large terminology and expansional vocabulary and all that stuff. But that's too stressful. I don't want to do that. So I'm more interested in getting other people to think about, like, and it feels weird, and I struggle with this all the time, because it's like, how much more could I do with my life if I wasn't on YouTube, right? But then I think about it and I say, well, because ultimately I think the best way for all of us to live is where we have more real experiences, and we spend more time prioritizing real relationships in the real world with real people that we love. That's the thing that's most important. And there's part of me that feels like if I just completely went AWOL on YouTube, social media, and just kind of put all of my digital technology on eBay and just spent all of my time playing with my daughter and building stuff with her, and fixing up the chicken coop, putting in a garden, doing all that stuff, and learning about nursing, and just kind of completely walked away from this, that my life might be better. And it's not a matter of burnout, but I think that one of the things, at least not at this point, I've gone through like smaller burnout phases, and I've done enough things. I mean, for example, my very first documentary that I ever shot was me climbing every single day for a year straight. And it was called Project 365. And it was just a silly idea that I got from a friend of mine who loved silly ideas and climbing. And he did a Project 365, and so he had done that at Devil's Tower in Wyoming to benefit I believe it was the Pine Ridge Lakota Sioux reservation, and to kind of help them fund a new clinic out there. And so this kind of idea, we were talking about it, and I was like, I should do something like that. I have type 1 diabetes. It would be cool if I did some kind of activity like that to provide a different type of platform for people to look at this condition. So I definitely got burnout after doing that, because I didn't want to climb for like 2 years after that. And honestly, that project ran from 2012 to 2013, early 2013, and my climbing has not been the same since. Like, I just have not felt nearly as interested in climbing. And so that has served, and at one point climbing was like all I cared about. Like, literally it was the guiding light in my life, pretty much. It was almost like a religion for me, which probably wasn't healthy in some ways. But having burnt out on one thing that's very important to me, it's given me some awareness of how ever present the burnout can be. It's waiting right there to pounce on you if you're not careful. And so you have to figure out what can you do consistently, and what sort of content can you make consistently that is going to work for you. It's really important to be selfish as a creator, because if you can't be selfish and you can't say no to other people, because there's a lot of people that go, oh, why don't you just do a video of this? Oh, why don't you go do that? And it's just like, yeah, okay, like, and who's gonna go to school and take my test for me? Who's gonna pick up my daughter in Massachusetts 3 hours away? And who's gonna pay my bills when I'm not going to work? And you know what I mean? It's like there's everybody has ideas, and people make it sound so simple, and we want to grow an audience, we want to reach people, because what our messages are important. Knowing where your food comes from, that's bloody important. Knowing that being active outside, very important. um, so yeah, it's just stay with it, plan ahead. Planning helps so much. Writing stuff out, because if you go into it and say, here's the point that I want to make, and write that stuff out just like you would draft a paper, then you have a lot more structure. It helps you keep from overshooting stuff, and then kind of put yourself on a digital budget, if you will, and then set a pace that you can do consistently. And the other thing too, if you're going to start a YouTube channel, I would say, don't like launch your channel publicly until you've got the header and all of like the artwork done for the channel, the description, everything filled in so it looks like somebody's home when somebody comes to your channel, and you have maybe 10 to 12 videos already edited and shot, and then you can just trickle them out like once every week. And then this way, if it takes you a year to get that library, that initial library of videos that you're really happy with, not to say that they have to be perfect, but get that that launch library of 10 to 20 videos in the can and ready to go. Get those queued up, and then have it so that those videos drop automatically. And then in the meantime, then that buys you a couple of months basically, where you can start shooting new stuff, and the content that you've already batched and prepared ahead of time, it's on autopilot and it's going out. And then that way you have time to kind of come back and have less pressure and say, okay, I got more time, I can make a handful of videos. And then at some point you're going to want, there's always that leave yourself some room, some slack between the time that you're shooting and the time that you expect to publish, if you can. And you can't always do that, but every now and then you get the opportunity to do that. And whenever you can afford that, that's always a much nicer way to go about it for your sake. So cool. Looking forward to the link to your video, Garth, and maybe we'll start doing video critiques on here too as well. I would love to, absolutely love that. So for anybody who joined kind of recently, started off talking about photo critiques, and now we're kind of into video critiques, and then also kind of all over the shop here. So that's what we do on Sunday nights, and I would expect nothing less. From you guys. So yeah, one of the things I like to do is just whatever I'm doing, whether it's photos or video, and deciding which one I want to shoot, or whether it's the topic that I want to focus on. And I mean, it's a luxury to do this. It's a luxury to say, I'm going to focus on what I'm curious about. uh, you can't necessarily do that if you're shooting commercially, which is one of the reasons, of course, why I stepped away from the commercial side largely. Like when I have a friend who has a business who wants to hire me, or if there's commercial work available that I am interested in, like, yeah, and I have the opportunity, I'll totally go and do that. But, I don't necessarily have the obligation to go and shoot stuff just to pay the bills if I'm not interested in it. And that's buying myself that creative freedom to really be curious about the stuff that I'm shooting. That's something that is really, really helpful to me, and something that I would highly recommend to anyone else. And one of the things I have been thinking about a lot is the element of, and I'm going to do a full-on video about this with a little more consolidated ranting about work and suffering and problem solving, kind of negative things, things that we look at as being uncomfortable and undesirable in our lives, but how those challenges and those difficulties, from a very real and practical standpoint, those are what story revolves around. And that most of the time it's hard to tell good stories through a personal vlogging type of situation because we don't want to enter into experiences that are uncertain and that are uncomfortable, that are distasteful and just trying. We want to have something that is just like, comfortable and it feels good and it's all like secure. And good stories don't happen that way. The only way to really get to a story is look for suffering, look for a pain point, look for that squeaky wheel, and that's where you're going to find the good stuff for a story. And hard work, is part of that. It's not like you always have to have this big epic adventure happening, but if you look for the thing, in whether it's something as small as, we can't get the hydraulics on this bloody, excavator to connect, maybe that's that moment, that's that pivot point, that pain point that you got to focus in on, and that's going to be a big part of the story. But if you don't hit that wall somewhere where the thing that you start off trying to do, where you have to work around it or get rejected or fail, if you don't hit that, then you don't have any story. And you've seen this a lot on YouTube where there's people that are, kind of like, oh, this is my day, and I went to the grocery store, and I went here, and I went there, and it's just like, and maybe there are some vloggers that do that well enough in a way that it's still kind of interesting, but I always feel like those are very easy for me to kind of go away from. And one of the things that I think one of the reasons why I'm attracted to outdoor adventure is that it feels like there's always a clear element of story there, which I miss the boat a lot of times by a very wide margin, because I have my own attachments to comfort and safety just like everybody else does, maybe in slightly different ways, but that there's a story that's there if you can just kind of get far enough away from your comfort zone to really capture it, right? And because there's always that level of uncertainty, because so much of our lives are not necessarily scripted, but scheduled and predictable and very truncated, because we want to have everything in a very optimized fashion. When we go outside, whether it's going fishing, whether it's, and hell, anything you're doing with a kid, it turns into an adventure because literally nothing that you want to do works out the way that you want to do it. But once you go outside, you invite natural elements into play, whether it's animals, whether it's weather, whether it's terrain, all of these things from a large scale like the Grand Canyon down to a garden or a little creek where you want to go fishing. All of these things wreak havoc on your plans and ultimately make you fall and drop your camera, make a mess, get bit by some kind of a bug, and like just all these different things that happen. And that is what creates the elements of a story. Those back to that kind of, that ingredient set. And it's those times when you really have to pull out the camera and you really need to be shooting. And this is something that I experienced, just this past weekend when I was out with my friend Rob. We're doing permaculture, talking about permaculture and doing videos about the, equipment that we're using and kind of stacking natural systems in order to make sustainable living happen in an urban environment. And it's like, you've been out kind of all day and it's just like, okay, enough, we're about ready to go. But there's just one more thing. It's like, this is the time when you either put the camera away, and like something's going wrong. It's like, okay, you know what, I could just kind of get off my feet, take a little break, go get a drink or whatever, or things aren't working right now. This is the time when I really want to keep shooting. And so I kept shooting. And I think that there's a few moments like that in this last shoot for me where it's very consciously aware of that fact that it's like, okay, I am uncomfortable. My brain is telling me that I should just take a break and I should go away, and then consciously making the decision and recognizing that signal as, nope, this means that something really important is about to happen. And not like, cosmically consequential, but just small in terms of like those neat little cuts on the puzzle pieces where you just get the right fit and just like things snap into place with your story. And it's so worth it to have those little pieces fit together once you get into the edit, because everything kind of comes full circle. And if you fail to do that, you kick yourself after, because it's like in the edit you see all of these things where it's just like, I was so close. Why didn't I should have gone back out there. I know it was cold. I know it was, but that would have really made the point so much better if we had kind of gotten in there and just stuck with it. So you gotta stick with it and do that hard work, and it's gonna feel uncomfortable, and it's gonna feel uncertain all the way through to the end. And that feeling of discomfort is something that um, I don't think it ever goes away, honestly. And it's like it's kind of like the perpetual motion of, like, if you know how like muscle contractions work in your body, and honestly all of the cells in your body, they function because of an electrochemical gradient. There's always a slightly negative charge inside the cell. It's part of the stuff that I'm studying for my exam tomorrow, so I'll share this with you. There's a slightly negative charge in the cell, and you have a slightly positive environment outside, and so the ions, the sodium ions, always want to come in. And more or less there's also other elements that are involved there, but basically there's always this exchange where it's always slightly imbalanced, and you have to have that imbalance to keep the cycle going. And when you reach equilibrium, true equilibrium, the body always wants to go towards equilibrium, but it's the very fact that the cells are unable to reach equilibrium that's what makes life happen. Which is kind of ironic, considering how everybody in society, everybody always wants everything to be the same. We want to have everything look the same, or a lot of people do anyways. I don't personally, but a lot of people are very invested in the idea that everybody should be paid the same, have the same amount of jobs, and or the same opportunities, and that everything should be exactly the same and should be very even. But the actual fundamental underlying biological infrastructure that allows life to happen, it happens because everyone's seeking that equilibrium, but never will ever achieve that. And so it's like, I kind of look at that as sort of a creative discomfort. How we always want that to go away. We want to scratch that itch, but hell, it just doesn't work that way. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe that's for the best, because I try to get that to go away sometimes, and it's like, if I didn't do this stuff, if I wasn't making movies, if I didn't have a schedule and hold myself accountable and say, okay, I got to get this done, I would either completely neglect everything and nothing would ever come out. I wouldn't have anything to show for any of my adventures, or I would just shoot a whole bunch of stuff and I would have, like, thousands of dollars of external hard drives filled with hours and hours of raw footage that nobody would ever look at, nobody would ever see. And this way I kind of have to go back and say, all right, let's clean this stuff up, let's get it done. Like, don't be afraid of going in there and messing up this awesome idea and turning it into a subpar reality that you created, but rather look at it and say, okay, like, you envisioned it being this diamond, and maybe it's going to kind of come out somewhere in between. Like, maybe it's just going to be a shiny piece of glass, but at least it's better than it being like a piece of mud or a piece of gravel. Like, you got to get in there and chip away and break that thing out of there. Get the story out as best you can, and that's a hard process to do. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's really too much room for disappointment if you care about the story, because even though the aesthetics might not be there, you'll still have the meaning behind that story, and you'll still get something out of it at some point. And I think, honestly, too, with the creative stuff, the value that we get from it, it's not something like, we look at it like, okay, once it's done, like, we hit publish, it goes live, and everybody can congratulate us and shower us with praise, and I feel so good. We love that, right? But really, it's not that short term. It's something where really what you've done is you've kind of planted a seed at that point, and you don't know how long it's going to be before that seed germinates and what it's going to really produce, because that content is like that it's a seed. It's like DNA that goes out there and is doing its own thing separately from you, and it's growing and living and impacting people and touching people's lives and changing the way people think about stuff, even if it's just something really simple. I mean, I look at my Project 365 documentary. I mean, from a technical standpoint, it's pretty awful. I mean, it's not the best looking piece of work by a long shot. But at the same time, to be fair, it's like my first thing that I'd ever done, and I just went from like, oh, I've made one video on YouTube. Okay, now I'm going to shoot an hour-long documentary that covers an entire year of travel and climbing, and I'm going to do that, like, all by myself. And that's what it was. So, when you factor in the learning curve, yeah, I'm not ashamed of it, but like it took years for that to get to the point where it started to grow, and it has reached, at this point, it's my most viewed video on YouTube, at somewhere around 170,000, I think, views, which again is not much. I mean, there are cat videos, like, and dog videos on here that get more views in like a week than that, or even in a day, hell. But like for me, it's like I know that that's something that I put my heart into, and it's gone out there and it's reached people that I will never know about. And maybe it's inspired people to do totally different things who don't even have any, interest in following my channel, but like have taken something upon themselves, or or maybe looked at that and said, man, this ass hat made this documentary himself, like I could do so much better, and they started doing something really important, and maybe something that's way better than what I made, because they saw the thing. But it's all come about far after that fact. And I mean, I've had other opportunities. Hey, good evening, Peter. Good to see you here as well. I'm glad you have a little free time to check in here. I shot some footage when I was out at Standing Rock, and it was, a year and change later that I got a call from a company that's like, yeah, we're making a commercial video series. We like your story. We saw it on YouTube. We want to use it. Can't we, and it's like I went out there initially, and I never thought about that as like something to I never thought about this as something to bring in money, but I hoped, and it wound up bringing something in way, way down the road, a year later. Yes, Peter, since you mentioned my hair, I have been accused on here before of putting too much effort into my hair, so I really wanted to go the extra mile to make sure that everyone knew that I was not attempting to shame anybody by being superficial, and that yeah, this is my hair. You can see kind of where my priorities lie in terms of aesthetics. It's just kind of what I'm working with here. I probably should get a haircut, and actually once the weather warms up a little bit, I'm going to do that. Hey, good evening, Kit. Good to see you here as well. Yeah, gonna have to fix the hair up a little bit. Just to make it a little easier to manage, because when it gets to this length, it's like in between, it's kind of weird. Like, I know that it's not worth it to grow it out for the long term, because long term, getting in a nursing program, long hair isn't something that's going to really be useful to me, and I don't want to be, changing bedpans and like, I got like, strand of hair in my face, or wearing a hairnet or something like that. So I think kind of neat and trim is the way to go for a nursing program. And the beard, I can kind of put any of my frivolous pursuit of aesthetics into my beard, if I'm interested in doing anything hair wise there. So that, or cosmetics, I guess you could say. That's probably how I'm going to apportion my efforts there, cosmetically speaking, in the near future. So yeah. So that's what I got going on here. That's what's coming up this week. That's my rant about creativity and all that stuff. I could be a nurse with a man bun, that is true, although I don't know if the program that I'm going into, if they allow at least student nurses. I think you have to earn the right, sort of like a samurai. I think it's like a thing where you have to earn the right of a man bun. I don't think that you can come into the program as a noob and have a man bun. So they might not respect all of my achievements, my vast achievements in the world of YouTube and climbing, and the ridiculous achievements that I have to put my name to at this point. So I think I might stick with the I might stick with the short short hair, which is odd. I can tell I'm getting old, like not like old like elderly and feeble, but just like my mindset is changing a lot. It's funny, in like the last year or so since I really got serious about getting a real career. And when I say career, I don't mean like 9 to 5 type of thing, but like um, you know that when I really started to take seriously the idea of like, okay, I want to work for somebody else more so than working for myself. Um, that was kind of the turning point for me, where it really changed the way I started to think about everything, and was like, man, I've enjoyed this, but I've really had a very extended childhood. I mean, I've kind of thought like a child on some level, kind of into my early to almost mid 30s. And it's only now that I'm starting to really go the opposite direction, where I'm realizing, wow, I kind of look back over my shoulder and I'm like, man, I was really not fully grown up, even though I was convinced that I was. And I think with just the practicality of the hair stuff is, and the style and just like the pursuits that I'm, you know, learning to adapt and enjoy new things, I think is a big part of that process for me. Um, So yeah, Maddie says I had to take my dreads out if I was going to get into my nursing program. I know that they have similar types of rules, and I think it's in most nursing programs, just because they want to maintain. It's almost like, in a lot of ways, like the nursing programs, I think, are a lot like military, kind of boot camp scenario, where they want everybody to look kind of squared away and look the same, and they want to enforce discipline and really get that concept of selflessness into the minds of the people that are going there, because, and I can see some value to that, like, I think that, when you go into something like nursing, I think it's important to have less attachment to something that is personal, or that your own identity, and more attachment to serving other people and the greater good, and saying, okay, like, I'm here for other people, and so I'm going to really focus on service. And there was a point in my life where that would have just completely rubbed me the wrong way, and I would have been like, hell no, I'm not cutting my hair, I'm not doing anything. If you tell me to cut my hair, then you're a bunch of fascists, and I'm going to get more piercings and grow my hair even longer. But at this point, I've kind of been on both sides of the coin, where I've kind of seen how that works. And I've also been in like an instructor position, not necessarily with nursing, but with first aid and first response, search and rescue, that, and climbing and stuff like that, and kind of seen things from a slightly different perspective. And it's like, okay, like, as an instructor, what do I want to see from people that are coming in that have the objective of service to other people? Kind of what is going to be representative of a mindset of somebody who really wants to serve versus somebody who's really more concerned about themselves. And so I try to apply that to my own thinking about kind of my own feelings, and it's given me some interesting perspective. But um, yeah, shaved head, beard, that could happen too. That's definitely pretty low maintenance. My head is very, yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to go. I mean, I've done a full Bic razor, completely skinhead type of thing. It's just it's a little extreme, and my head doesn't. I don't know if I like the way that it looks. Like, if I am, so right now I am not at my most fit from a physical standpoint. In times past, in the days of yore, when I spent more time in the weight room and less time at the editing computer, I was bigger, more muscular, and at that point, a shaved head and a beard, it looked pretty solid. I'm not gonna lie, it did not look bad. Now it looks a little bit funny, and I look more like somebody who came from like a prison camp when I have that. And I know that I'm probably gonna get well, I'm not even gonna say what I'm thinking to say there, because I'm sure YouTube would just obliterate my channel if I expressed any of the things, made a joke. But anyways, yeah, I just, like, with shaved head, I look like a victim of some sort of you know, humanitarian abuse. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't look good on me at this point. And when I work over the summer and maybe figuring out how to budget my time a little bit more effectively, I hope that that would get me to the point of being in a little bit better shape physically. But a lot of school and a lot of video editing, really not great for the physique. I mean, I'm not deteriorating. I mean, I've deteriorated to a point, and it hasn't gotten any worse. But it's just kind of like, could use a little work. Mohawk, yeah, that could happen. That could happen. I gotta read the bylaws of the nursing program and see if they will allow a mohawk. But I do. The mohawk was good, and I have to tell you, I gave myself that mohawk. I did that on my own. Like, I gave my wife the clippers, and I was like, "Here, give me a mohawk," and she started doing it. And I mean, does like all kinds of hair stuff and makeup stuff. Like, she's not incompetent by any stretch when it comes to hair and cosmetology. And her mom was hairstylist, and so she knows her way around a pair of clippers. But I gave her the clippers. I'm like thinking, okay, mohawk, like how hard can that be? And she started doing it, and I could tell. I took a look at it, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, come on, like. And so I was just like, no, let me do it. So I took the clippers. I was like, if anybody's gonna screw up my hair, I'm gonna be the one to screw up my hair, because she was just not getting it right. And I did it, and I nailed it. And I've never tried a mohawk myself again, because I've been very afraid. I don't know how I did it right, but I did it right. And I loved the way that it looked, because it was kind of like, it was a full mohawk. It wasn't one of those like little, you know, half-ass mohawks that just go on the top of your head and stop like right back here. But it like went all the way back down, kind of the full mohawk, but it was also wide, and it looked pretty. It was pretty badass. I was a fan, and my wife was a fan of it too, which didn't hurt anything either. But I don't know how I did it right, so I've been afraid to repeat it, and then like that I would bobble, because I trimmed my beard not that long ago. No faux hawks. Faux hawks, I don't do faux hawks. If I'm gonna have a mohawk, I'm gonna have a mohawk, or I'm just not gonna have one. But yeah, the faux hawk is not. Eh. Like, I went to school, when I went to college. My roommate was like a true crust punk. Like, he was a real punk. Like, with the made his own clothes, never bathed. He was a vegan, and like straight edge, and like all this other stuff. I mean, he was just like way out there. I mean, of course, he's ironically grew up and became a lawyer, and now is like a barrister somewhere in Vermont, and cut all the Liberty spikes off and stuff. But that's kind of where I was coming from. So we always had sort of a little smug, self-righteous feeling towards people that did faux hawks, as though that was kind of like sellouts. This is when I was in college, so some of that smugness and self-importance has stuck with me, I guess. So I just can't accept the faux hawk at this point. So I'm either going to do what probably will happen is I'm probably going to do some version of the proportions that I have to my hair, like longer on top, shorter on the sides and the back. Probably something like that, because right now it's not long enough in the back to get the mohawk the way that I want it. And I don't know if that I want to suffer through the in between enough to cut the top and let the back grow to kind of have everything match, especially when I'm going to be going into the nursing program, where part of the thing too is like, first impressions count for a lot. And when I deal with people, I've spent a lot of my life working under the mindset that, like, okay, I'm well spoken, I'm intelligent enough to communicate with people. I'm going to surprise them, because when they look at me and they see, earrings and all this other stuff, and they're going to think one thing, and I'm going to surprise them with something totally different. And that's kind of fun in its own way. But with the nursing program, there's a certain extent to which I really want to be really squared away and convey an appearance of, you know, having my act together. So there's a certain level to which I'm willing to kind of go that route a little bit more. So play a little ball with the folks in the system. Yeah, the bowl cut. I always wanted a bowl cut when I was a kid. My parents were like, "No, you're not going to get one of those stupid haircuts," and they made me cut my hair, which now is pretty much now is pretty much like, the way my parents forced me to cut my hair when I was little is now the way that everybody's cutting their hair, short on the sides, parted on the side. That's how they made me wear my. And I felt like I was just being abused when I was a child, because I was like, I want it parted in the middle, and I want like the skater cut, and like, that shaved underneath, and it's got to put it up in a ponytail, and like that's where it's at. Yeah, the long hair dream kit. I've had, and you can see in some of my videos, I've had pretty long hair, like kind of down to my shoulders, and like I love my hair, honestly. Like I'm not proud of it because I didn't do anything to achieve it other than just not die. So as George Carlin says about, things like ethnic pride and predisposition to various forms of cancer, they're not really things that are deserving of pride, because it's not an achievement. It's not like, oh, I climbed Mount Everest. Oh, that's good. Like, oh, I was born with hair that, kind of does this thing. I'm not going to be proud of that. But I do like my hair, but there's definitely a trade-off. I mean, it's a real pain when you get strands that are loose and all over the place, and it's just so much more work and maintenance. And then when you finally get rid of it, it just feels really good. And then of course you miss it. You're just like, damn, it would be so much better if I had long hair. But then once your hair gets past a certain length, you're just like, this is kind of a pain where I just want everything to stay together, stay out of my face. And like, I always got this one strand that's going to fall down and like, get in between my glasses and my eyeball, in just such a way that like I can't get to it when I have a helmet on or a hat, or I'm doing something with a camera. And so the only way to get that piece of hair out from in between my glasses and my eyeballs to like stick my finger in and then put like a smudge or smear on the inside of my glasses. These are very specific details I'm giving you. So, right. So, this is not something that's completely made up. This happens like all the time. Murphy's Law of hair. So, based on all that, I've gotten pretty used to it. Pretty used to the idea that cutting it can be freeing. Kinyuzi uses a bandana to hold it back. Bandana's really good. I've used the bandana. The only problem is with that, it's like when you take the bandana off, then it's kind of like, pressed back into your head. That's always like the weird, that kind of like, if you can wear the bandana, it's good. But then once you have to take the bandana off, it's like you kind of, it makes kind of, where do I go from here? It's sort of what you're saying there, Peter, with like the 6th month. Because that's exactly what I would do all the time. I would cut it every year. I would cut it like down to the skin with a razor, and then I would let it grow. And by 6 months, it would be, month 7, month 8 was always the one that like probably looked the best. And then, I would sometimes I go a little bit more than a year, but then you always have those awkward in between phases where it's too long to really hold back, and it's too short to really, or it's too short to really hold back, and it's too long to, just not do anything with it and just let it go free. So you're always kind of chasing stray hairs around, and feeling like you look a little bit funny. So, yeah, it's, hair has a mind of its own. That's for sure. Maddie has a question about photography. Well, this will be nice to change things up. Well, we got maybe off of the hair and onto photography. With glasses, I recently just got glasses. I cannot figure out how to see through the viewfinder when wearing them. How do you deal with that? So there is a thing in the viewfinder called the diopter, and I think that if you mean like being able to see in terms of like it being blurry, there is, well, usually somewhere around the eyepiece on the GH5, there's this little wheel that's right here next to the eyepiece. Sometimes it's like on the front, like right here. There'll be a little wheel that you can rotate. And when you rotate that, it adjusts the viewfinder for whatever your prescription is. Whether you're nearsighted or farsighted, you can use that to tune in whatever your particular what do they call that? Is that astigmatism or whatever your correction is that your lenses are set for, and it'll kind of adjust your viewfinder so that it plays nice with whatever lenses that you're wearing. Now, in terms of just being able to see through a viewfinder with glasses, I don't have a great answer for that, honestly, other than get a camera that has a nice big bright viewfinder, which is one of the things that is very nice about like the Fuji's, the X-T1 and the X-T2. The Panasonic, I'm assuming the GH4 and the previous models of the Lumix cameras, that they have nice viewfinders, but both the XT2 had a really nice viewfinder when I had it, and it was super nice, but the smaller ones, the smaller viewfinders can really be a little difficult there, because with the GH5, I mean, I can hold this like kind of out here where it's like fully a foot away from my eyes, and I can look through the viewfinder here as such. I mean, all the more so if I put it up to my eyes, but it's so good. The viewfinder is so good that that has helped me a lot, to the point where I don't really have any issues that are specific that I've encountered that are specific to wearing glasses. Now, some of the cameras, like the Sony RX100 series with their tiny little microscopic viewfinders, or like the XE3, I really did not like the viewfinder on that, but I was able to work around it. So I don't know if that helps, if that answers your question. Either one of those scenarios potentially. Kit suggests some you can make the EVF display smaller so you can see 100% of it from a greater distance. So that makes sense. Accommodation insufficiency, so I can't focus from near to far. I have progressive trifocals. Okay, there's a lot of words in there that I have to think about for a second. I can't focus from near to far, so I have progressive trifocals. So does that mean that you've already tried the little diopter in there and that doesn't work? Does that seem to be the problem? In some cases, it might mean that using the screen, or like I guess the live view is what I used to call it when I shot DSLR, on the LCD screen, basically, is kind of what I would use. And it's an adjustment, especially since I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Maddie, you're coming from shooting DSLR, which is mostly viewfinder oriented. It can be an adjustment going from that to shooting more with an LCD, and there are some mirrorless cameras that are only LCD, and it takes a little while to get used to that, and that's awkward and uncomfortable. But then once you kind of get through that, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, it'll work out decently. So I don't know that I have a better answer for that. I know that there's always okay. Yeah, so you're shooting with a film camera right now, and getting a new camera, something that has, if it's a DSLR, make sure that it has live view, and or get a mirrorless camera that has an LCD screen. We could probably, I know we've emailed back and forth a few times about this stuff. I would personally recommend getting a mirrorless camera, and I think that the Fuji X-T1, given the budget that I recall you kind of outlining for me in one of our emails, I feel like the XT1 with vintage glass, maybe one electronic lens, a native lens that can autofocus, and then get a handful of vintage lenses with some of the cheap dummy adapters. Good night, Yusuf. Thank you for stopping in, and I hope we'll see you somewhere around Twitter, Instagram, or back here next week. So sleep well, and keep that hair under control. But I think that the XT1 could be a really good camera given your budget, what you're looking at, with some vintage glass, and you'd have pretty good variety there. Nice bright viewfinder that's gets really high marks from a lot of folks, and also a really good LCD screen that articulates enough. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the XT1 has a the screen doesn't come all the way around to face you like in selfie mode, but it does articulate enough to where you can shoot from lower down, and the screen flips out a little bit. And I think when you have a screen that articulates and it gives you the live view, it also starts getting you a little bit more used to the idea of not shooting. And this is one of the things that happened to me once I started shooting mirrorless, is that I got away from shooting stills with the camera right here in my face. And this completely, and I'm actually talking about this in the video coming up on Thursday in the photo critique, because part of that critique I go on a little bit of a rabbit trail talking about shooting candid portraiture. And one of the ways that mirrorless cameras changed the way I shoot candids is that it got me out from behind the camera. So I would put the camera out away from my face, and I would come out from behind the camera to actually talk to the person, and I would kind of have the shot framed up, kind of, shooting from the hip or down at the side, or even just like, right here from the chest, and you talk to the person, and then they relax because they don't see the camera in front of your face, so they feel like, oh, okay, everything's good, I can relax now, they're not shooting anymore. And meanwhile, you have the camera on silent mode, and it's ticking everything off, and you can kind of glance down just to make sure your framing is right without, really interrupting or distracting. And in the meantime, like, they're relaxed and expressive and emotive, and you're getting all these great things that are happening, and you're doing it all without the camera being in front of your face. And it's a different way. It feels different. Yeah, the sneaky factor is absolutely like the biggest tip. And I've never said it before because I thought like that's what everybody does. But like the whole idea is like you really it's very sneaky, because what you want to do is you take some pictures because they're expecting you to do that. And so like the first few pictures, they're like very stiff and posed, like, kind of like, you could take them surfing. They're so stiff, practically using for a surfboard. And then you kind of take those shots, and really what you're doing with those test shots is you're just figuring out the angle and the composition, like based on where they're sitting, get a little foreground in there. Then you figure, okay, this is where I want the shot to be. And then you leave the camera down here and you just hold the button down, and you have it on like a burst rate or whatever. And you got to be careful, otherwise you'll just fill up the card. But you put it on some sort of a burst rate, and you just let it tick away, and they're like, oh, good, now we're done, now I'm done posing for the camera. They can't hear the shutter, because the electronic shutters on the little mirrorless cameras are like, they whisper quiet. And then you wind up with these great pictures where really what you're capturing is not the person's relationship to the camera, because most people, when they see a camera, it's like, oh, it's a camera, it's the Werner Herzog says, it's like, death staring you in the eyes, that's kind of how you feel when there's a camera looking at you. But if the camera's out of the way and you're talking to a person, it's like, okay, now it's safe, like it's me and you again, and you have that opportunity to connect. So mirrorless cameras do that in a way that DSLR with the loud slapping shutters and the big bodies and the big lenses just cannot do. And so I've found that for me, when it comes to image quality, whatever I may be lacking in terms of, pixel peeping and blowing up and doing all that stuff, the technical side, I've gained so much more, especially in terms of documentary work where, oftentimes I have to connect with somebody and take a quick series of portraits in a time when, I may not have a lot of time to earn their trust and to kind of connect with them in a way that would make, I've even shot people with DSLRs that I've been friends with for a long time, and it makes them like kind of tense up and kind of get a little bit awkward. And it's only when I, do that sneaky trick that, that gets everything to kind of loosen up a little bit, so, yeah, camera around the neck, Peter, that's a good idea. Use your phone to control and shoot it. That's even more sneaky. I hate shooting with the phone, and the camera. It's like I've done that a few times. Like that takes more commitment and more work, but that's definitely more sneaky. I know Zach Arias has a similar type of thing when he's doing street photography, where he says you take your camera, and like if there's people that are standing there that you want to take a picture of, You pretend to be shooting something off in the distance, then you look down like you're reviewing your picture, and you're really reviewing your picture up here. And when you're pretending to review your picture, and the person looks at you and is like, "What the hell is this idiot doing?" That's when you actually take your shot of them. So they think that you're reviewing your picture while you're shooting them, and you're actually reviewing the picture when they think you're shooting something off in the distance. And so, different little ways in there that you can be sneaky and capture images of people. And then, hey, there's always the opportunity when you take somebody's picture or somebody's looking at you and you see that they notice what you're doing, where, if you have a second, a lot of times it's good because it kind of forces you to maybe do something that's uncomfortable, where you go and you say, hey, like I'm a photographer, and I really love taking pictures, and here's show them a little bit of your work, and I thought you look really great, or you look, I love your hat, or I just really wanted to take a picture of you. I think you look really interesting. And some of that stuff, it sounds kind of weird, but you'd be surprised how often, taking that opportunity to break the ice, and you can let the camera be that icebreaker for you. It can be really, it can be really fun. Um, so yeah, and Kit says, keep looking through the viewfinder for way after the shot. Oh, okay, kind of like Zach Arias, and protect myself from eye contact with the camera. Yeah, that's definitely one way to do it. I've enjoyed. I mean, there are some times when, like, for me, photography, it can be a very reclusive pursuit. Very isolated and meditative and solitary. Which is not a bad thing at all. Um, but I think a lot of times people look at photographers as like sort of paparazzi, or as like they're stealing something. And if you can show that you actually, and of course this is harder to do if you're in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, although learning just enough of the language to pay people a few nice compliments is something that actually can go a really long way. Because if people, you kind of flip that paradigm around from, I'm taking a picture of you because I want to steal your identity, or I want to take this thing and sell it to some, these are the things that a lot of people think. They see somebody pointing a camera, it's like, ooh, what are they up to? They're nefarious. And if you act in such a way that reinforces that stereotype, then they're going to be, then you're not helping yourself out. And, in the long term, maybe even other people are going to have to pay for that in some way. We create a culture of surrounding street photography that basically, in a lot of ways, it's what we make it. And if we take the opportunity to get out from behind the camera and say, hey, like, I love your hat, I love what you're wearing, it can actually present and really change the interaction a whole bunch. Granted, it depends on kind of where you are. Like, there are some people that'll like give you the finger, or yeah, it's a good icebreaker. Exactly, it's a good icebreaker. Uh, people like other people taking interest in them, but there is a and I heard something recently about a psychological study where people really like eye contact, but there's also people also really don't like eye contact if they feel like the person is threatening or nefarious. I mean, that's probably common sense, and they probably spent like $1 million doing that study so that they could tell you something that, like, oh, we have data that proves this obvious thing that everybody already knows, right? If some like creepy serial killer looking person is like staring at you, you're probably going to feel uncomfortable, right? But the idea is, the science behind it is basically that we like eye contact with people that we perceive as being friendly or attractive, or that we are attracted to, or what have you. We like eye contact because that means that they are interested in us in some way, shape, or form, whether it's platonic or or otherwise, right? There's an interest there, there's a connection. And so if you can explain what your interest is, whether your interest is something that they're wearing, something about their face, or like, oh, you remind me so much of one of my relatives, or this person, that a good friend of mine, and like, I just I had to take a picture. And you can connect that with explaining why you're willing to do something as crazy as take pictures of a complete stranger. And you can really give them that sense, even if they don't get it, personally, and they're not like, oh wow, yeah, now that I know you're so passionate about street photography, now I want to go buy a camera too. Like, what company should I shoot? What camera should I shoot? Right? Then you may not get to that point with them. You probably won't. But if they feel your passion for what you're doing, they will understand, and you kind of develop a spiel. You go into I'm a photographer mode, and you kind of develop that little preset spiel that you give to different types of people, and you say, oh, like, here's why I'm passionate about what I'm doing, and they feel that passion. They understand that your focus on them is not from a nefarious reason or something that's that they don't understand. It's like you give them a little insight into your interest, and that's something that can create a really nice interaction. And then a lot of times, once they kind of have you break that ice, then it's like, oh, like, yeah, you want me to pose, you want me to do anything different, blah blah blah, and you can actually have a little conversation with them. And then again, you use that trick, getting out from behind the camera while you're shooting, and then they really come alive, and you get not just the image that you're sneakily stealing, but you also get like a full experience of like who this person is, and you get to see different emotions and different things come out. And another thing that can be disarming too is like if you again, don't necessarily do this in every situation, but like if you hand them the camera and you say, here, take my picture. A lot of times with in with little kids and stuff like that, if you can show them kind of how the stuff works, or like, and I guess should be careful, like giving your camera to a little kid and saying, here, take my picture. Their parents might not like that either, but you got to use your your judgment based on where you are and how comfortable you feel doing this stuff, and whether or not street smarts make it out to be a good idea. But involving the other person in the process, I guess, is really the headline for that whole rant that I just went on, is involving other people in what you're doing as much as possible. And some people, they just don't want any part of it, but a lot of people, I think most people, their initial reaction is one of like, I'm unfamiliar with this, therefore it must be threatening or bad. But as soon as you can introduce a little humanity and a little bit of something that they would be familiar with, and it doesn't usually take a really long time to kind of connect what you're doing to somebody that they knew in their past who used to shoot photos, or Nat Geo, or some sport that they like, or some thing that they can appreciate that has something to do, where you can connect something that they care about or are interested in with photography. And the more you can involve them and connect them with what you're doing, then it's good practice for being a decent human being, and for interacting with other people, because it's really easy to take these really compelling portraits of people that we have no idea who they are, and have zero connection with and zero interaction with, and basically we sell a lie as street photographers that like, oh, there's this deep soulful portrait of this person who's going through and wondering where their next meal is coming, and really it's just somebody who had to go take the trash out of their house, and they went out without a coat, and you happened to walk past when they just came out of their house, and you didn't, and there's somebody that makes 150 grand a year, and they're living really well, but they were just wearing a ratty old t-shirt and an old flannel that they had from the time they were in high school. You walk by, you took a picture of them, and all of a sudden now they're like this iconic image of brooding suffering, but you don't really have any idea what the hell you're shooting or who that person is, because you're stealing an image. And I do this too. This is one of the things that, like, it's just kind of funny, and one of the reasons why I feel like it's good practice to take time to engage and to cultivate real human connection, even if everything that we're doing in its finished state of work is digital. The real experience that we have in creating that digital thing, that real tangible humanity, is something that we can choose not to lose. And I think that we should. I think we have a responsibility, because really what we are doing, at least what I'm doing, I will speak for myself, is like, I want to create digital things to put into the digital world, little breadcrumbs to remind people that the real world is not here. The real world is this stuff here. It's where we actually live. That's the real world. And breadcrumb people, kind of like the red pill-ing, but more breadcrumb-ing, to get people to recognize that, like, even if I have to coax them into the real world through the use of a digital camera to make digital content for digital platforms, that somewhere along the way that realization of, like, oh man, like, here's what really matters, that's kind of the way I look at it. So Peter says, I was out taking engagement photos on one of the LA bridges around sunset, and this guy started following us, asking if my camera had the internet and if I would let him check his Facebook. Good call saying no on that. I would probably do that as well. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you about that. That would be kind of scary, and that could be a very different. That situation could go a little bit differently, or a number of different ways if you're by yourself and somebody's like, oh, hey man, can I use your phone? Like, I need to, and it can get kind of aggressive there. Because really what it is you're being politely mugged, right? Like, they don't want to come hit you over the head with a tack hammer and take your phone. They would rather kind of, you agree to them robbing you, basically, which is, I guess the courtesy, there's a little bit of effort put in there, so that's kind of cool, but, yeah, get that monopod out and start brandishing it threateningly. That's the only way to go. I mean, in that case, a DSLR would be really handy because that's got a little bit more clout. The weather sealed magnesium alloy body that really takes on a new meaning of self defense and weaponry. You got to carry a sock full of nickels with you just in case, when you go out to shoot in some of those areas. Yeah, the DSLR mace, that's exactly it, Yeah, it's interesting. I've never talked or thought a whole lot about self-defense or protection out there. That could be an interesting thing to talk about. I think I'll probably make some more videos about that. Of course, with talk about guns and self-defense and all that stuff, people get really really worked up in a hurry, especially with all the protests or whatever that are going on now this weekend. And I've been just kind of like trying to disengage from as much of that as possible on Twitter and Instagram, just because I'll probably wind up talking about those issues a little bit more when my daughter starts shooting, so that should give you an idea how I feel about gun control. I think that I want to control all the guns that are near me. That's my belief on that. I'm not a huge enthusiast, but I think there's a lot of value in being able to look after yourself and defend yourself, and that's something that I've become much more it's something that I'm much more comfortable with, or that I'm much more interested in, I guess, having a daughter and wanting, more as a vehicle for her. Because for me, I feel like I have an advantage where just my physical size, because I'm taller than most people, I've been able to talk my way out of plenty of really sketchy situations in the past where, I don't have to get like all blustery and threatening, or even it doesn't come to that. It's just like, look, hey, like, let's do each other a favor, and let's no harm done, blah blah blah, and it's like people are less likely to mess with me. But like for her, it's a very different story, and so I'm looking at things a little bit differently now when I look at those kind of issues. Shooting street versus shooting in the woods. In terms of safety, I think there's definitely a component there on the street where you feel, I think it has to do too with like the environment that you feel more comfortable in. There are definitely things that I look for on the street that I don't look for in the wilderness, and things in the wilderness I look for that I don't look for on the street, and it's a matter of trying to figure out which of these I'm more comfortable looking for. And sometimes the stuff that you are not looking for, but things that you would want to be aware of in the woods are things that are a lot more sneaky, where stuff on the street, in a lot of cases, it tends to be stuff that's more like directly confrontational and in your face, so you have a feeling that if nobody's directly in your face, that you're probably doing okay. Yeah, mountain lions, coyotes, alien abductions. Yeah, all that stuff. Those are viable things to be concerned about. I spent a little bit of time out I used to live in San Diego, and there are mountain lions all over the place. And big rattlesnakes. Oh my goodness. And it's just like those are the things like you don't see them until like they're predatory, they stalk you, you step on them. They're the no-see-ums, right? Those are the things that are more scary because you don't have an equal opportunity to get away from them because they're not playing, it's not a level playing field where with another person, all conditioning and physical abilities aside, like we would assume that it's a pretty level playing field if it's one person against another. You can see them, you can hear them, assuming you don't have some like weird gang of ninjas like trying to stalk you or something like that, or the CIA repelling off of silent drones or something from overhead. You probably have a decent chance of being able to recognize, at least be familiar with the threat. Whereas in the woods, I'm most paranoid about ticks, especially out here on the East Coast. Ticks are just like they give me the heebiest of jeebies. Ticks are the worst because it's so hard to go out and not get ticks, but at the same time, you don't want to dump a bunch of permethrin all over yourself. And it's very highly toxic bug spray, and you put it on your clothes. It's not supposed to come in contact with your skin, which it's like, okay, like that makes me feel really great. I'm putting something on my clothes that has all these, warnings about what happens if it comes in contact with the skin, and all to keep bugs away that are the size of the head of a pin, and that will give you awful diseases if they bite you for more than like 15 minutes. So it's just kind of like, yeah, there's always threats and things that require us to keep our wits about us and our eyes open, no matter where we are. So, all right, guys. Well, we're rounding the corner here on an hour and a half, kind of talking about a whole bunch of different things. This has been really interesting. I've enjoyed this live stream chatting with you all, and I'm sure, having gone over an hour, I'm going to get some well-meaning suggestions of how I should edit my live streams down and plan things out, make it shorter, and how I should, timestamp every different conversation that happens within this, and in addition to everything else that I'm doing. And well, I'm never going to do that because it just doesn't make sense. So, having said that, I've really enjoyed you guys being here with me, spending the time chatting. And I'm looking forward to getting this week's videos out to you all. And I hope that you guys have gotten something useful and interesting out of this conversation, and that, we'll be seeing you around here on the channel. If you guys have any further questions, comments, concerns, considerations, thoughts, complaints, anything like that, just leave it in the comments. I would be happy to get back to you after the fact. Otherwise, so make sure you're subscribed, notifications enabled, which I'm guessing those of you that are here probably already fit into that category, but thank you for taking the time to come out and chat and check in here with what we're doing. Get out there with your cameras, maybe some pepper spray and whatever sort of self-defense mechanisms you feel are appropriate. Get out there, make more of the megapixels, put your camera off to the side, and connect with people and maintain some sort of a human experience, because that's important too. All right, guys, thanks for the great live stream. We'll see you all next weekend, and well, in between here too. All right, gang.